This podcast is part of the Blueberry Network. Blueberry.com is where listeners and podcasters come together. Check it out at blueberrywithnoease.com.
So the Earbud U podcast, while fun to put together, doesn't run for free. And while we're happy to be a new member of the Blueberry Network, we'd like you, our faithful listeners, to do something for us. If you're thinking about engaging with podcasting either now or in the future, and you're stuck on a hosting company, Blueberry is for you. Look, there are a lot of podcast distribution companies out there that are going to make you a lot of promises. But Blueberry offers three things that made it my go-to when starting the Earbud U podcast. Number one, convenience. With the PowerPress plugin and WordPress integration, it works with around 90% of all websites out there. Number two, optimization. Yeah, it took me a while to accept that Apple and iTunes pretty much rule the roost when it comes to podcast distribution. But after I came to that realization, Blueberry was great at making everything very, very easy. Number three, publishing and distribution is simple. Look, I have a lot of stuff going on in my life. I design corporate trainings, I give speeches, I write blog posts, and occasionally I get to see Mrs. Earbud U and the kids. But with Blueberry, publishing my podcast was done and over in 3 easy steps. No muss, no fuss, no bother. Look, head on over to blueberry.com, no ease, and type in the promo code earbud_u, and they'll give you a month of hosting service for free on me. You can't beat that deal with a stick. That's blueberry.com, no ease, and type in the promo code earbud_u. And now, on with the show. Leadership and self-deception around diversity and social justice is at the event horizon for most organizations. But Lawrence Fishburne isn't there to help them get to the other side. Welcome to the show. This is Earbud U Season 3, Episode number 6. So, I don't know if you all were, paying attention last year, particularly last summer, but Black Lives Matter rocked the social media world and served as one of those rare social media movements that actually crossed over into real life, really lived, and was talked about amongst real people. Heck, even in the the rural area in which I live, people are aware of Black Lives Matter, which is kind of shocking because this is an area where Twitter is not that big. But a year later, as our presidential election heats up and as the strains of the cries of candidates fill our airwaves and our Twitter feeds, our collective inability to focus on one thing as a nation and actually resolve that thing once again rears its ugly head. Oh, and in case you didn't know, Gary Shandling is dead too. Privacy, security, healthcare, advertising, your private data, and making money all link up in this space with social justice as well. But for the life of me, I can't think of how all that collapses together at this point. Look, I'm going to take some time to think about it while you listen to this word from our sponsor. Me. When you're talking about business development for the Peace Builder, things can get tricky for you as a Peace Builder if you can't define your unique value. In my new book, Marketing for Peace Builders, How to Market Your Value to a World in Conflict, I lay it all on the line for you. I tell you everything I've done to grow my business, including how I found out what the value of my skills as a Peace Builder were to my market, and how to value them against the market. This is not easy, I won't lie to you, but it is worthwhile. Just like making peace is worthwhile to a world in conflict. Order your copy today and get a handle on advocating for your value right now. Look, visit Amazon.com today and type in Marketing for Peace Builders. The book is only $26.99, and you won't have to pay for shipping if you order it using your Amazon Prime account. And while you're there, leave a review and follow my author page. There's links to my blog, links to the Earbud U podcast, and there's even links to the LinkedIn group for this book as well. Finally, once you've received your copy in the mail, tear that package open, take a picture with you in the book, and tag all your friends and associates and me at Human Services Consulting and Training on Facebook and show them that you're committed to developing as a peace builder today. Look, you're helping me, I'll be honest. You're helping my kids, and you're helping your world as well. And thanks. Okay, and we're back. Go and get a copy of that book. Be an early adopter. Don't be a late adopter. Be an early adopter. The book's good. Anyway, after having some time to think about it, I think the answer that ties everything together, the social justice, the privacy, the security, healthcare, advertising, private data, making money, I think leadership is at the core of all of this. Leadership is the core thing that ties all these disparate areas together. Leadership on the issues of privacy and security is critical for continued success in this country at a personal, professional, national, geographical, whatever level you could possibly imagine. Leadership in the space of healthcare is the only thing that's going to keep us all going, even as getting healthcare changes gigantically in the future. And leadership, ultimately, is the thing that's going to give more people the freedom to engage in doing the hard emotional labor in a future where more and more people may wind up doing, well, what we understand from our industrial revolutionary mindsets as less and less practical work. Now, this interview I've got coming up here with Mitch is much more ground level than the interview that we just did with David Burkus a couple of episodes ago. It's also more focused on leadership directly, but also indirectly, than the interview that we did with Ruth Henneman. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's all leadership, right? Right. It's all leadership. All right. Well, that's it. Let's get into it. Welcome to Earbud U, Season 3, Episode number 6. Get your knowledge on through your earbuds. Our special guest for our show today is Mitch Mitchell. Mitch Mitchell has been in healthcare for over 25 years. For at least 18 of those years, he worked in various healthcare organizations, 17 of those years at some type of management level. With all this time spent in management, Mitchell, or Mitch as he likes to be called, learned the leadership and management skills that help motivate others to reach out and to accomplish organizational goals. And with his unique position in healthcare, he also understands that this is a diverse world where each person has even the subtlest of differences, and that every person deserves to be treated fairly. Now, Mitch has been talking, presenting, writing, and in general making a ruckus in the areas of leadership, motivation, healthcare, finance, management best practices, and diversity for all of the 25 years, and like I said before, well over the 25 years that he's been involved in this field. I am sure that Mitch, who interviewed me for a recent Google Hangout, which you'll be able to link to in the show notes below the doodly-doot and below the player on the page, I'm sure he will bring the pain to this conversation today, and I'm sure it's going to be wide-ranging, and I want to thank Mitch for coming on. So welcome to Earbud U, Mitch.
I thank you very much. And see, I'm going to bring pain already because it's been 32 years.
Why do we get wrapped up in the details of the biography? let's not get wrapped up in the details. Let's not get wrapped up in the bullet points of the resume.
Yeah, we don't want to do that.
Yeah, who wants to do that? I have much more pressing questions. There's things that inquiring minds want to know. But the first thing is, I did give you that sort of broad opening. But why don't you tell me, for our listeners, what is it that you do exactly, in your own words?
In my own words, so I help hospitals make money by looking at their revenue. We increase their revenue by looking at their processes, sometimes by looking at their coding and looking at what they're actually charging for services. And by increasing revenue, it gives them an opportunity to increase cash. And if that process is broken, I can fix that as well, because I'm well versed in the entire revenue process. At the same time, because of the years that I had as a leader, for instance, we talked about those 18 years. You mentioned those 18 years. Well, that's when I was just an employee. And it's for 17 of those years, I was actually in leadership. So I've always kind of been the leader. And as a consultant, sometimes I have to act like the leader. I've been in interim leadership positions, but also you go in and you've got to basically sometimes pull rank on people who are the employees, no matter what level they're at, say, okay, you know what, this is about money. If you don't care about money, fine, but I have to tell everybody, then they don't like that. So you never play with money. Money always wins.
Well, and you know what, money, as my mother would say back in the day, sometimes makes people act funny. The shortest distance between 2 points is a person and his money.
Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly. But I've seen, one of the strange things about it is that I evaluate people. I've always been an evaluator. As a military kid, we moved around all these different places, and so you had the opportunity to always be able to evaluate people. And so leadership was a big deal with me. When I was a director, for instance, we had this leadership training, and they sent out this little survey thing, and you were supposed to grade yourself, and then you were supposed to pick employees at random to grade you, and then stuff got sent out. And I gave it to a supervisor, said, okay, just pass this out to certain people and whatever. And I tied for being the highest rated director. So it showed, that I did pretty well. Now, it wasn't perfect, because you're never going to be perfect. I mean, truthfully, if you can get 90 to 95% of the people who actually will like you enough, I'll use that terminology, like you enough to allow you to lead them, then you're doing well. You're not going to always get everybody. There's haters everywhere, or there's people who wish you would do it a different way. Right. But, there you go. You just work with it.
You just work with it. Yeah. Well, okay. Before we get into sort of the heady area of leadership, I got to ask you a question, and I warned you that I was going to ask you this, and I want to get this on the call. There's a picture of you floating around on the internet holding a parrot.
Yeah, baby.
What? Some of my listeners are not bird people, so what is going on with the parrot? Inquiring minds want to know.
Okay. I was at a healthcare convention in either 2006 or 2007. I don't remember exactly which year, but it was in Florida. Right, and so they had all the vendors out there, and one of the vendors had these people that had 3 different parrots. And you could get your picture taken with the parrot. You could either just stand next to the parrot, or you could actually have the parrot sitting on your arm. Now, one of the things I've always been bad at is remembering jokes. I mean, up until probably the internet came out, I had only remembered one joke in my entire life. When the internet came, I can remember a few more jokes, and almost all of them involved parrots. And I don't know why. Well, yeah, because parrots actually do talk. So you can, give them a little sentient and let them have conversations. So when I got to see the parrots and I saw this really colorful one, I said, oh, wow, I'd love to have a picture taken with that one. And then they said, would you like to let the parrot sit on your arm? And it was one of those moments where you're like, dang, those talons are pretty big. Yeah, let's go for it. And that's why I have that picture of the parrot. And that's why I got that smile, because I'm like, look at me. I overcame and I let a parrot sit on my arm. So there's the story. I've lost you again.
Ladies and gentlemen, out there listening, I am laughing because there are a couple of people I know personally close to me who are not necessarily bird people who will listen to this podcast and will say, "Oh my gosh, Mitch is a bird person." So they'll say. So I had to get that. I had to get that out of the way because you know what, the internet is big, and as a person who has built a business using the power of the internet, and I want to talk about your blogging and all the other kinds of stuff that you do because this is very interesting to me. But as a person who's sort of lived both before the internet and now in sort of the post-internet, or maybe not even post-internet, but the internet era. How have you seen, well, let's break it down from like healthcare and then into leadership. So how have you seen healthcare change, and then how have you seen leadership change in an era of instant communication and some would say instant gratification?
Well, the first one's real easy to answer. Healthcare ain't changed a bit. You know, really, this is an industry that, well, 1997, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act was employed. And basically,
HIPAA for all
HIPAA for everyone. Well, I didn't know if everyone would know HIPAA. That's why I just said the whole thing out there. Right. And the thing is, its biggest issue was privacy. Mm-hmm. And so healthcare providers got really antsy about the issue of privacy, to the point that a lot of them were late to getting into the internet, to even having websites for their hospitals. Now, truth of the matter is, most hospitals don't ever really have to worry about advertising because they're usually at least, 20 to 30 minutes away from the next hospital. So they're pretty much solidified in who their market is or who their demographic is. But you still need to have a presence. You need to have a web presence. If you're smart, you're going to have a social media presence. You're going to be able to send out email alerts to people who subscribe to it, giving them health tips on all kinds of things. Or if they're running what they used to call clinics to test for cholesterol and different things like that. You need to be able to have that kind of thing if you're smart. And what I find is there's not a lot of hospitals that are doing it. They don't want to put that information out. They don't want to put out, other than the CEO for the most part, who the upper leadership is. They'll tell you who the board members are, but They don't tell you anything else. And so for healthcare, they've really dragged their feet in coming along with this. I mean, even electronic medical records, which is a really big deal because that was also part of, the HIPAA thing, is that they were supposed to go that direction. I mean, here we are, what's this, 18 years later, and there's still doctors who are not on electronic medical records in hospitals who are just implementing it. Really, people? You had all these years, and now you're doing it kicking and screaming only because of some other things that are coming into place? That's a shame, but that's healthcare. Leadership is a different story, because you have found, like me, that a lot more people have realized, hey, I can put my stuff online and hopefully compete with everyone else in getting the word out that I know something about leadership principles. And I like to, put it this way. I was in it early, and it was a fluke that I was in early. My website was created in 2002, and I was able to start putting certain things out back then, and I started blogging in 2005. Since then, a lot more people have gotten into the market online. But the reason that, I think I was an early adopter for internet, but overall I wasn't, because until I wrote my book, I hadn't even realized there were other leadership books out there. It sounds odd, but
that's odd. That's a little odd.
Yeah.
I mean, in an era of you had heard of, I'm assuming, you would heard of, Zig Ziglar and Tony Robbins and those kinds of folks, right?
I had heard of Tony Robbins, but I had never associated him with leadership. I still don't, by the way.
Okay.
But no, I'd never heard of him. Well, you know what? Think about it this way. Internet really, for me, only came out in 1995. I didn't even know there was an internet until December 1995. I mean, that shows you. But I'd been on computers. And so we didn't have a lot of that. We basically got most of our knowledge from TV commercials. Or if there were someone, you ran into who might have read a certain book and said, hey, I read such and such a book. So not knowing that there were no leadership books was not really all that beyond the realm, even in 2002. But I wrote my book, and then of all things, I got invited to I'll say seminar. It wasn't quite that, with Ken Blanchard.
Okay.
And you know him, $1 million manager.
Yep.
And I had heard his name after I wrote my book, and he was speaking in Scanty Atlas.
Okay.
And so I got to meet Ken Blanchard, and he gave out a free book. And I told him, hey, I just wrote a book on leadership. I just finished it last year. And so he said, can I read your book? Sure. Okay. So I got to email him. Well, I had to actually print the entire thing out and send a copy of the thing, which was 100 and something, almost 192 pages. But that's okay. Ken Blanchard wants to read my book. I'm going to print the whole thing out. But it wasn't until, this is going to sound really goofy, it wasn't until Barnes and Noble created a store, put a store locally, and I got to see it that I said, hey, there's a whole section of books here. And there you go.
Well, with all that, and with that wild journey, and we got to talk about Ken Blanchard too. By the way, what did Ken Blanchard give you feedback on it for your book? What did he happen to say about it?
It was very interesting because I heard 2 months later he sent me an email, and what he said is, your book reads like people are at a seminar. I love the principles that you put in it, but I wouldn't have done it that way. And that was the whole email. And I took that as, all right, he liked the principles, and a seminar is exactly what I wanted. Beautiful. So I was elated. Then, a few hours later, I got the follow-up email from his assistant who said, Mr. Blanchard doesn't usually write books like this, and I'm surprised you gave it to him thinking that he was going to publish it. To which I wrote her back and said, I didn't think he was going to publish it. I met him. He asked if he could read it. I sent it. Suddenly, there was this disconnect. And this is going to sound wrong, but, you're thinking, well, wait, you're a guy who talks about leadership. You've written these books on leadership, but somehow you did not communicate to the person who reports to you why he got this book in the first place. Right. And I couldn't imagine that I would have an assistant who would even think to write that kind of letter to someone else.
Right.
So, there's this thing sometimes where you have people who you consider know these things about leadership or whatever, who may not necessarily be doing it in their own home. And then I'll say home, in their own space.
In their own space,
and that was intriguing. Yet, I still felt good because he said he liked the principles. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna take the liking of the I'm gonna take the liking of the principles. Yes, I'm gonna take that. Yes, okay. Yeah. let's move on. Okay, so how do you then? Well, okay, let's do a deep dive into leadership because clearly that's what you're passionate about, and that passion comes through in how you talk about it. So let's talk about leadership. What is your philosophy of leadership for the benefit of our listeners? What is that philosophy, Mitch?
In general, leadership is the ability to get people to work with you and do things for you of their own free will because of how you interact with them. So, that's good leadership. Leadership isn't saying, okay, I've been promoted to director, now I'm in charge. Right. That's not leadership at all. Leadership is basically allowing people to have their say. Well, you have to make the ultimate decision. You're not trying to pin people into a hole. You're not trying to micromanage them. You're giving them all the tools that they need, all the education they need. You're giving them the freedom to make their own choices. And if it happens, to make their own mistakes without thinking that you're going to come down hard on them and chew them out for basically being human. You're going to work with people to their skills and their strengths and their weaknesses, and you're going to help them to improve while you're working to help the organization improve and helps you improve. It's all a symbiosis. And I think that, to me, bad leadership misses that fact. They figure that they hire employees for their purposes without seeing that without those employees, nothing works.
Now let's draw some lines here. Let's draw some fine lines. Let's get granular a little bit on this. And I'm going to ask you about entrepreneurship, and I'm going to ask you about your book and how you've built your business. But I want to get granular a little bit on this area of leadership. When you talk about leadership, do all people in the organization, based upon, and any organization, it could be a healthcare organization, a nonprofit, it could be a for-profit organization, it could be a government, it could even be the military. Do you believe that there is a structural difference between how an organization allows individuals, or the messages that it sends to individuals who are put in that employee silo versus individuals who are put in that manager silo versus people who are put in that supervisor silo versus people who are put in that C-suite silo? Is there a difference in the messages about leadership that those individuals get in those silos based on your definition of leadership?
Oh, yeah. Should there?
Okay.
No, but there definitely is.
There definitely is. Now, how do you, as a leadership consultant in that space, sort of, how do you overcome, or how do you advise a client to overcome those silos and break down those barriers?
Well, you can't get anything done until you actually find out what it is that they want. And as you know, quite often what the C-suite wants isn't what's needed.
Right.
And unfortunately, you can't always give them what they want based on what they need. Right. So you can only, you can do the best you can with who you have to work with. Now, something that I've been known to tell people, and I totally agree with this, is that you can have great leadership that may not necessarily be the ultimate leadership. In other words, you can be a department leader who understands the principle, has the people who are working right, and you work well with them in a company that is basically deficient leadership-wise or anywhere else. But you can shine and your department can shine. And if that's the only thing you can really control, then that's the only thing you can really control.
Is that the difference between positional authority and leadership? Because this is something that I teach I do some trainings, some corporate trainings around leadership. And I'm being asked to do more and more of them, and I'm sort of doing a deep dive into this area. And one thing that I'm fascinated by, I don't know if you ever read the Robert Cialdini book, The Psychology of Persuasion.
No.
Okay. Well, basically, he says in that book, or he postulates in that book, that there are 7 layers of influence. And this book to me is dynamite, because he talks about how each of the 7 layers influences the other layers, or each of the 7 levels influences the other levels, and it sort of sets up a pyramid structure for individuals who need to be persuaded and influenced in order to do something. And the role of leadership is to persuade and influence. So the first level is this idea of reciprocation. I give something to you, you give something to me. It's kind of how the internet works. I give you free content in exchange, you give me your email. That's reciprocation. The second level is commitment and consistency. Commitment and consistency says basically people want people to be committed and consistent, and they will sort of societally force you to be committed and consistent, and to remain so over a long period of time. And if you deviate from being committed and consistent, that's kind of a problem. Which to me is a fascinating concept, and seeing how that sort of falls underneath reciprocation is fascinating to me. The next area after reciprocation is this idea of or reciprocation and then commitment and consistency. Then there's social proofing. And social proofing basically says, we find out what's correct by hearing and understanding from other people what's correct. And we sort of go along with the crowd. Liking says, which is the next level, says that we would prefer to say yes to people that we personally like. But the last level, or the next level underneath there, is this idea of authority. And authority is typically where I see a lot of leaders going to. They default to authority. My position says supervisor. Your position says employee. You go do what I say. And they haven't really worked on the other levels of psychology to even get buy-in from people before they get to authority. And it's interesting to me how authority is the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th one in. It's not the first one. So appeals to authority are not the first thing that most people should go to. So I've been doing a lot of facilitation with this lately, around this. I've been asked to do a lot of facilitation around this. And so I talk about this idea of at a practical level, an employee will go in, or a group of employees will go in and have a meeting with a manager who's supposed to be the leader. The manager will tell them whatever it is that's going to be happening, and then everybody goes outside and has a real meeting and decides what's going to go on.
Good.
And we laugh because, this really happens, So in that, when you talk about C-suite executives, and I'm assuming you work with a lot of those, how do you get them to understand that positional authority piece is not the first lever of influence that they need to pull, even though instinctively that's the one that they want to go to? Because what you're talking about is collaboration and autonomy and resiliency and building collaboration as a leadership function. But they're not talking about that.
You want to know the truth? I don't talk to a lot of C-levels people. No.
Okay.
It's the HR people who bring you in, and then you want to talk to everybody, and they say, well, Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so is off doing this or doing that, whatever. They won't be participating in this. Most of the time, you don't get to talk to that level. You just don't. I think it's a major failing, but okay, fine. Like, that's why I was saying you have to work with the people who you have to work with. Right. So a lot of times you have to kind of take them out of the picture. Now, what you'll find sometimes is feedback comes back to you from someone saying, well, so-and-so wasn't necessarily sure they agreed with this. They could have, my thought, you could have come. You could have just come to this. You'd have understood that everything, instead of taking it out of context because you weren't there, you're not, you heard maybe I said this, but you didn't hear the rest of it to see how it related. So that's their fault. You really can't always control that kind of message, It's kind of like this thing now with the Starbucks and the red cups, and people are fussing about all kind of thing about this cup. And I don't drink Starbucks, so I came to this with a totally open mind. But then I was watching this video last night where this kid basically showed that for the last 15 years, Starbucks has put out a red cup at the holiday season that's never said Merry Christmas and never had anything else on it. Sometimes maybe a picture of a snowflake or a picture of Santa Claus, but that's it. So this is not a new thing. And everyone's turned it into this massive thing, and they've done the same thing for 15 years. It's just a non-issue that someone has decided to make an issue for whatever reason.
Okay. So as a leadership consultant and as a person who operates in that space, and the struggles with the people in the room not being the ones that need to hear the message, how do you remain effective then in your role? I know you wrote a book, and so that's one way. But what are some other ways that you remain effective?
Well, you remain effective by realizing that you don't have to go in and change every single person in order to affect change at all. Really. Okay, I have to use myself as an example because it's just easier this way. Okay. And I like to think that I was always pretty good at leadership. Mm-hmm. So I go into this one hospital in the position of director of patient accounting. Mm-hmm. And on the first day, I saw things that were just frightening me. For instance, they had the registration people going into the emergency room and changing the beds after patients were done. See, look at you. You see your look on your face right off the bat. You know that's wrong. If a patient was driven to the hospital to go to the emergency room and had difficulty getting out of the car, they had one of my registration people taking the wheelchair out, going to get them to bring them into the emergency room. If on the floor they needed a medical record, they would call down to my registration department and tell them they had to go to medical records and get a medical record and take it down to the floor. On day one, I wrote a letter. Every director, vice president, and the CEO in the hospital saying, as of the end of the day, that no longer happens. It's not their responsibility. Some of this is against the law. And it ends. And if you have an issue, you can talk to me about it.
Yeah, how'd that go?
The CEO wrote me, and the CEO said, Good for you. I didn't know these things were happening in the hospital. You're absolutely right, and I back you 100%. Bam. So then when I got the call from the floor, I said, oh, go talk to Terry because he agrees with me.
Now, as a person who is in the conflict engagement area, in this conflict engagement space, and approaches leadership as opposed conflict, approaches conflict as a competency of leadership and as a section of leadership, one of the things I'm very interested in, and this is reflected in your story, is sort of how organizations get to the places where they get to, where they've sort of made these kinds of decisions that either allow people to take responsibility and accountability, or which is a core piece of leadership, or don't allow them to do that. What have you, and I got to ask the question because this is a conflict resolution podcast. What have you seen with conflict? And even just in the example that you brought up, what have you seen with conflict in organizations and how people either lead or don't? What's been your experience?
What you have a full lack of communication. Everything is so decentralized that no one really understands what their role is or what the role is that someone else has and how they actually end up working together. Mm-hmm. And so what ends up happening is you will have someone who might be a stronger personality in one area who can go to another area and use that strong personality to, in their own way, convince or connive another director to acquiesce to their wishes, and they just do it with no thought as to whether it's right, whether it's ethical, or whether it hurts your own department.
Right.
They just do it. That was this particular case, by the way. You know, when I got there, I recognized, hey, wait, everyone is using this department as, you know, their office staff. And the thing is, my department had its own specific role. They were not well trained to do the job they needed to do. We had to basically go from scratch to do this thing, but they didn't know. And then the people in the other departments had been getting away with it for so long, they didn't know. We didn't have a thing back in 1995 that was called corporate compliance. So you didn't have anyone who was reviewing all these things. You had all the medical stuff. You know, if something happened on the inpatient, you had all of that. You had something to review records for outpatients, but you had nobody who was really looking at everything and how it was supposed to work and how people were supposed to work together. And until I got there.
Right, yeah.
Well, the truth of the matter is it should not have been my role, but when I saw what was going on, I made it my role.
You made it your role.
Yeah. And it turned out that by making it my role, it then started to change a culture within the hospital that was kind of amazing. I mean, you know, okay, I can sit here now and say, okay, I can take a lot of credit for that. But at the time, I thought, how amazing is this? That I've been able to go to these people who basically wanted to fight for this other thing that meant nothing to them. And a year later, we have this great symbiosis. We have this great relationship where things are working now. I'm helping them to do parts of their job a lot better. My department's doing their job a lot better. We've got a lot more money. We have totally reduced this other thing. I mean, things are running really well now. And we have our processes down. Now, some of those processes that you guys thought were good, these goals that you had, turned out those were bad goals. They were bad goals because of this and this and this. And so, you know, we worked on a whole lot of things. I mean, it was interesting because, like I said, for the position I was doing, I should not have legitimately had that kind of authority. Right. But this is one of those things I like to tell people about being a good leader. If you're a good leader, people who even have the authority are going to at least listen to what you have to say, as long as what you have to say is beneficial for, we'll say, the greater good.
The greater good. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Well, and of course, like you said at the beginning, and specifically with healthcare, you know, makes money, you know, specifically in that space. But again, I guess with any organization, any for-profit, or any organization that's tasked with making a profit, if it's for the greater good and it makes money, hey, not a problem. Yeah. You know, we're gonna get on that. Okay. There are, at last count, and the only reason I know this number is because I actually had to do a deep dive and do some research into it for another project I'm working on right now. But there are 363,000 volumes on leadership in the Amazon.com bookstore right now. You've written a book.
Two
books. Two books. You've written 2 books. What is the entrepreneurial process like for you, having written 2 books? Because I look at a person who writes a book, I look at that person as an entrepreneur. They've built a product. They are building either a business or a series of offerings around that product, and they're selling that product. And we'll have links to Mitch's, so you can get Mitch's 2 books in the links below the player in the show notes. But 363,000 volumes. Everywhere you turn, it seems people are talking about leadership. Seems to be very highly competitive. How are you building a business? How are you building an entrepreneurial project around those 2 books? How are you doing that? What are some of the nuts and bolts of that?
Well, we'll begin with this. I'm not on Amazon. Yes. And for actually a couple of specific reasons. One, because of what you just said. There's so many other people there that you're going to get lost. 2, one of the things Amazon likes to do is they say, okay, we're going to give you a publicity push. So for 30 days, we're going to give your book away for free. But you now have to take it off your website or anywhere else you have it. You can't promote it for this time period because we're giving it away for free. And so a lot of people go for that. Their thinking is, well, this will help me gain a lot of publicity, do whatever, and now I'm going to make all kind of money. And I don't know a single person that's worked for. I know a lot of people who've told me, hey, I was number 1 on Amazon's list of blank and whatever, but it didn't do them any good. Yeah, a lot of people might have downloaded their book, but they didn't get anything for it. They got no business afterwards. When they were able to put it back up, they didn't really make any money off of it. Because they basically had to shut down talking about themselves for like 30 days. And so for me, I said, no, that's not happening. But what the books do is they help to give you credibility. Right. So with my first book, I was able to parlay that into a whole lot of speaking engagements. And that's how I ended up being able to speak in 9 different states because I had that first book out there. And most of the organizations that invited me were related to healthcare. And so now I was in healthcare. I had this book on leadership, and I was speaking to leaders in healthcare. So that worked out well. The second book, I just basically, completed in May or June. And I haven't really parlayed that into a lot yet, but I've sold a few books. And the thing is, by putting out my price, someone buys it, I get it all. I don't have to take my little 7 to 10% that Amazon may give me for something that took me a couple of years to put together.
Sure. And the struggle with self-publishing or the struggle with any kind of book publishing actually nowadays is that, and I've been doing sort of a consideration of this as I've got my own book out, and worked on that process. Like the deep dive into publishing and the deep dive into self-publishing is, and really the philosophy is, you used to have these big distributors that were also gatekeepers, and they helped you out and they did all these things for you, at least mythically. They did all these things for you and they got you the push and they set up the book tour for you and they set up the publicity and they helped you with the speaking engagements and did all these kinds of things. And we know the names of these places, some of which no longer exist, Penguin and Random House. And I mean, they did HarperCollins, they did these things. And some of those organizations still exist. But the fact of the matter is Amazon has made, and I'm not here to bash Amazon. I mean, Prime is used in my house. It's all over the place. But for publishers, when there are 363,000 volumes just in one section alone on Amazon, you're right. How do you cut through the noise? And so that's an interesting point. The other piece is that I have to think about with books, and I wrote a blog post about this, and I'll ask you this question, is does book writing still matter? In a world where there's 1.3 million pieces of content created per day, there's 157 million blogs out there, does writing a book still matter?
Yes. Oh, yes. Dude, okay, look at it this way. Ask somebody, you write a blog. Oh, yes or no. Most people know, but a few people. How easy is it for you? Yeah, geez, I struggle kind of figure out what to write about all the time, whatever,
Right.
whatever,
Yeah.
whatever. Oh, I wrote a book. You wrote a book? It does elevate you. And
Yeah.
then you can say, I wrote two. You wrote two books? Now, it doesn't matter if it was a bestseller or you only sold one copy. The thing is, you can tell someone, I wrote a book.
Right.
I was able to put my conscious thoughts together and put it all down in one place. And I wrote a book. Even if your book is only a compilation of things you've written before, which is what my second one is, by the way. The first one was, fully just this thing I wrote from start to finish. The second one was a compilation of newsletters and early blog posts on the subject of leadership. And I ended up having to rewrite half of that content anyway. But still, it basically says you were able to put it all together into some cogent fashion. And there it is. It's a book. And the first one here, look here. I mean, I got a book. I got it. Look at this. It's a full book.
It's a full book.
It's a full book. So no one can actually take that away from you. Because, you get asked sometimes about the process of writing, and people don't necessarily value writing as much as they should. And when I get that question, I ask the question, okay, how did you do in high school? Did you love writing papers? Oh, God, I hated to write. Oh, God. Then you understand the process of writing is not necessarily all that easy.
Correct. No, it's not. It's not.
It's easier, but it's not necessarily easy.
Well, wait a minute. Hold on a second. Now, let's backtrack this a bit. We are both in the blog space, and we understand how blogging works. I mean, I'm pounding out 500 words a day. You're doing your thing over there. We've got, 157 million blogs. There are bloggers everywhere. And I get back to this commitment and consistency thing. Is it the writing or is it the commitment and the consistency over time that's more beneficial for the writer, in your opinion?
For the writer?
For the writer, not the reader, not the audience, I'm not talking about the audience now. The writer, the person producing the content, the person making the product. Every word is a product.
Yeah, for the person who is doing the writing, it is the writing that's more important.
So it's the commitment and the consistency, or is it over time, or is it just, hey, I'm going to write a blog post that's 500 words today, and then I'll wait like 3 weeks and maybe write another one?
No, it's actually the commitment to say that you're willing to at least do some kind of writing every day. Okay. Now, I'm saying some kind. For instance, I mean, I have 5 blogs.
Right.
Now, I am not writing a blog post every single day. I mean, a lot of those I may write ahead of time. Some I may write, 1:30 in the morning, whatever. But, I schedule it so that I have at least one post a week on at least 4 of my blogs. A couple of them, I must have a post at least once a week. It's not even a question. But I write other stuff. I mean, I write for other people. I have articles that I put on LinkedIn. I have articles that I put on my Facebook page. I also do what I call the commenting run, which says that I try to comment on, a few blogs a day. So it could be as many as 10 or 15. Or it may just be, 3 or 4. But it's still the process of writing, because I'm not just going on there and say, hey, nice post, I agree with you. I mean, that's not writing. But writing basically says you go to something that it has inspired at least something in you that you can write about. Whether you agree with the person or not, it's something that you do. So, it really is that idea of saying once you get into a pattern of writing, you write. And that's just what that is.
Okay, but do platforms matter then? I'm thinking of Medium.com. I'm sure you've heard of Medium. I'm sure you know what's going on with Facebook Notes, where they've relaunched their Notes application to make it more blogger friendly. I know you've read blogs and seen them, and you and I follow each other on Twitter, and I'm putting this stuff out all the time on Twitter about people who are frustrated with WordPress and are abandoning it in droves to go to these easier content platforms where they don't care who owns the content, quote unquote. They just want to get their content out there.
BuzzFeed. You mean WordPress.com blogs?
Yeah, WordPress.com blogs.
Okay,
it's too hard to
because I'm on WordPress, but it's
right.
.org. It's the software.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm talking about WordPress.com blogs. I read a lot of these bloggers that say WordPress.com is too hard for me to set up. It's too hard for me to self-host. It's too hard for me to do this, so I'm just going to go publish on LinkedIn, or I'm going to publish on Facebook Notes, or I'm going to publish on Medium. So now the question goes from, does book writing still matter over here, which you said yes to this. Now as a blogger, let's switch this a little bit. Does blogging still matter on your own website?
Yes.
Okay, now how are you going to then fight through the noise and the domination of the walled gardens of Facebook and LinkedIn? How do you do that?
I don't care about them. Okay,
all right, okay.
Say that initially. Okay, well, here's the reality. The reality is that if I'm only looking to totally just gain publicity by going through these other places and whatever, then that's one thing. I'm not necessarily looking for just that. For instance, I recognize that as I write new content on my blog, if it's consistent with my website, because my business blog is associated with my business website, it's on the same place, then it helps my website to rank better. And it helps me to rank better, so that if people are searching for, certain things that I do, I'm more likely to come up higher than a ton of other people because I've got this content on my site.
So you're using the content to play the SEO game.
Bingo. Right.
Yes, okay.
Now, I can still take my content after it's been on my site, and I can take some of my content and put it on LinkedIn, and I can put it on Facebook, but it's still my content. I publish an article on Medium, for instance. I'm just using it as because actually I really didn't know who Medium was until this week. I never paid attention to him before. But I publish it on there, or I publish it on Huffington Post.
Yeah.
I can't then take that and put that on LinkedIn because basically I've given the rights to Huffington Post. Those people can't do that.
Right.
So that's now someone else's stuff. But from my perspective, I wrote my own content. I can put it anywhere I want to. I can allow other people, every once in a while, it's rare, but every once in a while, I will allow someone, if they say, God, I really like to use this. Can I use this for such and such? Sure, go ahead. Just make sure I get the attribution. And make sure if it's online, it links back to me.
Links back to me.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, like I said, now it's mine. It's not just me that I'm looking at. It's the fact that I kind of own it. Kevin Hart, whatever. It turns out Kevin Hart is one of the smartest entrepreneurs out there because he owns everything that he's a part of. So even going way back when, he owns, if any record he put out, he owns it. Any tapes, he owns it. So it's not that he has to go fight the publisher for the rights to his stuff, or that he's only getting paid a certain percentage. He owns it all.
Right.
And he knew that way, I guess when he was in his 20s. Where he learned that you have to own your stuff. And he risked losing a lot of money that people wanted to give him for their rights to his stuff. But look at him now.
Right. Yeah. No. And you know what? I don't disagree with it. I mean, I'm a big believer, and I've talked about this on this podcast before in other episodes with other guests. But content is king. I believe content is the fuel driver for the internet, and I'm not gonna wander down the road of like content shock and are people overwhelmed and is there too much out there and our audience is overwhelmed. I'm not gonna walk down that road. I have my own thoughts on that, and that's for another podcast for another day. But my point is that I do believe in ownership. I do believe you should build on real estate you own. And as far as these walled gardens go, I think they are distribution platforms. They are ways to distribute things you already own, which is in essence what Kevin Hart is doing, what you're doing, what I'm doing, and many others are doing. But I don't want I'm never going to give the platform the authority to own whatever it is that I put out there, because you're right. The platform. I mean, you said it yourself. You said I don't care about them. And really at a blunt level, Facebook and LinkedIn and all these other walled gardens that are content garden hoses for the gushing fire hose of content that's out there on the internet. These garden hoses don't care about you either. They don't care, because you don't make them enough money unless you're you brought up the Huffington Post, unless you're Ariana Huffington, and then they care about you a lot.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not begrudging Ariana Huffington. Don't get me wrong. I mean, she built a media empire, and she deserves everything that she's gotten. And so do the Ken Blanchards of the world and those types of folks. But my point is that unless you get to that level of sort of influence, getting back to influence, that level of influence and that level of reputation. And we shared an article on reputation yesterday via Twitter. But once you get to that level, then you get to sort of make the rules. Whereas you and I, as medium or small size players, really do have to control our content.
Right. And we both have seen a lot of people who have basically kind of given away their authority to someone else. And at some point, every single one of them laments doing it. They always do. I don't have that issue. Well, okay, that's not quite true. I kind of have that issue a little bit because I have close to 5,000 articles online and regular magazines as well, but not as many. Most of the stuff's online. But there's a lot of it that was written for other people that I have basically allowed other people to take the credit for it. Mm-hmm. But, you do that sometimes when you're a writer, and I wrote a lot for a lot of other people. I wrote, for a lot of other blogs, and, they paid me to give them this content that then they could put on their website to help them. But, I don't necessarily mind that. I mean, I write for my accountant. I get free accounting services and and I write for her blog, and it's benefited her because her website, she's not a large accounting firm, but she's got the highest ranked accounting website in this area because I write her blog.
Right.
So, it works out that way. My name isn't on anything. If there's ever any real questions, I mean, she's not going to answer them. I am, but she's the one who, is either going to get the credit or the condemnation for the stuff. But I'm getting something out of it.
You're getting something out of it, yeah.
Yeah. No one knows it's me except for her. Well, now you guys do, but you don't know whose blog it is. So
whose blog it is, right? Yeah. So yes.
But you know what I mean? I mean, in that instant, I don't own that particular stuff any longer. But I'm good with that. That's something. It's not in my niche. It's not leadership stuff. It's not healthcare stuff. I don't mind.
Yep. Okay. So you've clearly been doing this for a long time. You're not a new babe in the woods. You've been doing this for a while. What keeps you going after all these years? What gets Mitchell up in the morning and moving? I mean, you've got leadership and you've got workshops and seminars that you're doing. You've got the consulting that you're doing. You've got speaking engagements. You've got the 2 books. You've got the entrepreneurial things you've built out from that. You've got the content and the blogging. You're a very busy guy in a lot of different areas. What keeps you going? What gets you up in the morning?
First, that really makes me sound impressive. I like that. I need to borrow some of that. Let me take this.
I'll send you that one little audio piece. I'll just pull that out. Just send that to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to make that my answering machine. Hi, you call Mitch Mitchell. Listen to all this stuff. No, you know what? I mean, I will tell you the truth. In a way, I was kind of forced into entrepreneurship. And after you've gone through the other side, which I'll call the corporate side and whatever, and you realize how little protection you have of yourself, even though you think you have responsibility for yourself, you really don't, no matter what level you're at. You start to realize that as an entrepreneur, you are basically responsible for either how successful or how non-successful you are. And it's not easy. It's definitely not an easy thing to do. And what has helped me is that I have been able to forge relationships with folks who actually, in essence, go out and look for people who do what I do to contract with to come in and help on big projects. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't have to do other stuff. I mean, I'm reaching out to do speaking engagements all the time. I will put together seminars and then I have to try to market them to see, how many people I can get to come and listen to me talk at them for a couple of hours and actually will pay me for it. I mean, you write the books and you write the blog posts, and I'm diversified. I mean, that, yes, I have my leadership blog, I have well, it's the same with the leadership. I actually have a healthcare blog or a health blog along the same topic. I have a finance blog. I have my social media, aka blogging, aka I have that blog, and I have my local blog. And I talk about things that are local, or sometimes it's just a story that I don't have anywhere else to put. I have a whole lot of things in place, and it's my intention to try to make myself enough of a personality that offers some kind of intrigue that someone out there, if I get them reading, will say, you know what, I need to have this guy come and talk to us about this. Or I need to talk to this guy and see if he can help me with this. And it has happened. And so, that's the thing about entrepreneurship. For instance, unless you're on a track in a major company, and a big deal company, Amazon-sized company, Microsoft-sized company, where you can work for someone else and still become a millionaire, as an entrepreneur, working for yourself, or you can tie in with other people, but basically you can make pretty good money on your own. You make way more money than you could working your basic 9-to-5 job. And some of the perks. I mean, I was a military kid and I did move around, but since I've worked for myself, I have been all over this country. And I've been to some places I never said I wanted to go, but still, I now have been there. I can say, look, I was there. And that's been amazing. I've seen some things I never would have seen, and I had some experiences I never would have had if I had still been a 9-to-5, employee.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of heart. It sometimes takes a bit of having to genuflect a little bit and say to someone, hey, have you heard anything out there from so-and-so, whatever? It takes a balance between bothering someone too much or not bothering them enough so they don't know who you are. That's a tough one. Because, we're trying to get ourselves known. We have to get over that thing where we were brought up as kids. Don't brag about, don't brag. Actually, you're younger than me. I don't know if you grew up with that one, but that was a big one with us. You win all the time, but don't talk about it. Well, you better talk about it if you're an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, no one. The thing that I always say is, I appreciate the employee ethic and I understand the employee mindset. I was an employee myself, but when you get into, and I'm discovering this now as I go deeper into my own entrepreneurial journey, but and I'm right at the beginning of mine. I'm nowhere near where you are, so I'm right at the beginning. And as I go deeper into this, I'm really learning that there's a couple of things. People like us, and I'm going to get to the diversity question here, but people like us sometimes have something to prove, and so we try a little bit harder, and we push a little bit harder than maybe people in the dominant group do. That's the first thing I'm learning, and that can either be a hindrance. Or it can be a help. It just depends on the situation. Like you said, it's a fine line. So that's the first thing I'm learning. And then the second thing that I'm learning on my entrepreneurial journey is, and I had an intellectual realization of this, but now I'm having more of the emotional realization of it, which is deeper, that if I don't do it, it doesn't happen. Period. Done. End of story. Like if you're an employee, you go work at somebody else's place, you show up, there's tasks for you, you do the tasks, maybe you do them well, maybe you do them poorly, maybe you do them mediocrely. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, you go home. Maybe you take some other tasks home, maybe you don't. But I mean, you're not responsible for the day-to-day running of that organization. Even if you're at the top of the organization, you still have to report to somebody, whether it's a board or venture capitalists who are funding your organization or a bank who may have given you a loan. You're reporting to somebody else, as Bob Dylan said back in the day. Everybody got to serve somebody, right? But as an entrepreneur, you're almost unemployable. Like,
oh yeah,
you're almost. It's almost like if I ever had to go back into the employee ecosystem with the chip on my shoulder. And with the idea that if I don't do it, it doesn't happen, I have no idea. I say I have no idea. I have an idea of how my conversations would go with management and supervisors who were placed over me, to give me leadership and provide me with guidance and growth about, what the tasks are I'm to accomplish. I know how those conversations would go. And you're in the same spot, I think. That's kind of what you're talking about. This idea of there's an employee and then there's an entrepreneur, and employees are sold the idea of safety, and that entrepreneurship is risky. But for my money, and I think and I'm going to go into diversity. I think for my money, for women and minorities, entrepreneurship is the way to go, in this culture. You talked about Kevin Hart. One of the areas that you focus on is diversity. Diversity issues in leadership. I know we don't have much more time to open up that can of worms. Maybe I'll have you back, but let's kind of crack that can open a little bit. Let's kind of peel back the lid just a little bit and look and see what's inside. Diversity, leadership, Mitch Mitchell.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Open your mouth. You got a couple minutes left.
Oh, good. Well, here's the thing about diversity, and it's an interesting thing because you will find that you have people who understand that there's not enough diversity, and you have people who saying, "Oh my God, all I ever hear about is diversity." They hear about it, but they don't do anything about it. So we look at some of these numbers and we ask these questions: is this fair or is it not? And I can't remember which coach. Let's use sports as an example. I can't remember which coach it was who once said that we will know that there is no more of a diversity issue in sports when a black coach can get fired and there's no question that another one will at least have an opportunity. Well, we really still haven't reached that yet. I mean, the NFL has a diversity policy that they still have to at least interview a minority, but they don't necessarily have to hire one. The NBA, which you think would be, pretty balanced and even when you look at the ratio of minority players to non-minority players, and yet we almost had a thing where there were only 5 minority coaches in basketball in 2015. That almost happened. Now there's 7. The ratio still isn't great compared to the players, but there you go. Baseball, I think there's now 2 because Don Baylor got the job in Washington. We're back up to 2. There ain't none in hockey. Okay, we'll give them hockey, but you know what I'm saying here. Okay. So you have this thing. You have this thing where there's a lot of women who are in supervisory positions, maybe director positions, but move them to the C level, you don't have as many. So you don't have that. You have people who got upset with Viola Davis. The woman wins an Emmy and she proclaims something saying, finally we get a chance. And there's a group of people mad at her for saying it. But she just told the truth. I mean, come on. I mean, this is the whole thing with diversity. Diversity is not supposed to be about the folks who already have the power keeping the power. There's a lot of other folks out there. There's minorities. There's now baby boomers who are getting kicked out of positions and having to start all over. There's the disabled. There's people who are overweight who have difficulties getting certain jobs. There's people, it's strange. The hair color can dissuade certain people. There's all this stuff that nobody thinks about. Diversity really is a big issue across the board, which is how come I gave a presentation once on succession planning where I said part of your succession planning has to be the inclusion of those who aren't included already. Because diversity is what makes us all strong. Why do we think the United States is the greatest country in the world? Because it's the most diverse country. Yes, we got there kicking and screaming, fussing and fighting.
Well, and okay, well, we'll talk about America. Okay, let's. I'm a history junkie, so I mean, the American philosophy is not that we're united by a creed, right? We're not united by a race. We're not homogenous like Japan, or we're not historically homogenous like in England or France. We're not even culturally and historically homogenous like a China. Right. We're united by a creed. And the creed says what? All men And they use that word, okay, because they were 17th century guys. All men are created equal. Now, what happens after that? They were agnostic on.
Yeah.
That's the creed. The creed is what unites us. Unlike other countries where there's no creed, the biggest example is the Balkans in the 1990s. You remember this?
Yeah.
There was no creed uniting them. And so you had battles between Serbians and Bosnians, and I mean, there's a breakup of a major country, and you can point to a lot of countries in the world where there's no uniting force, and there's no homogeneousness either, or homogeneity. There's multiple competing tribes, creeds, languages, cultures, and then they all pick up sticks and stones and start killing each other.
Mm-hmm.
We've avoided that to this point by focusing on and being committed to the creed. How does diversity prevent us from getting to a place where the creed fractures? And then we wind up just like everybody else. And I asked you a big challenging question.
Well, yeah, and you asked it oddly. I
did.
That's not the way I was expecting that to come out. So now I've got to totally reorient myself. Okay, here's the thing about diversity.
Mm-hmm.
You're a history guy.
Yeah,
let's think about the Civil War.
Okay, let's talk about the Civil War.
It took Frederick Douglass basically talking to Abraham Lincoln saying, y'all ain't necessarily doing as well as you could be doing in this war. There's a whole lot of whatever word they used at the time.
Right, yeah.
Who are willing to come in and help the fight on your side if you'll give up this thing saying that it's a whites only war. And Lincoln had to think about it, and he talked to Grant, who basically said, yeah, because it turns out Grant was letting a lot of people get killed in order to win the battles that he was winning. He was running out of men. So, of course, now we needed more men. So Lincoln could do that. What could the South do? Well, we can't be giving our slaves guns. One, we ain't trained them how to use it. Two, they could turn them on us, which was the thought. Truthfully, I think we both know it probably wouldn't have happened if the slaves would have turned the guns on them, because it would have been beyond their thought to do it.
Right.
But this is really how diversity kind of works. Even if it's brought, like I said, kicking and scratching, without doing that, the North doesn't win that war. They were actually being I'm going to say out-coached by Lee.
No, they were. No.
Yeah.
Some of the greatest generals in the history of American warfare have come from the American South.
Yeah.
There's no arguing with that.
The
I mean,
North
you just can't.
was more willing to sacrifice men for all those victories that they got, where there was this bit of gentility, which sounds weird when you're talking war, but it really, they were doing all this great planning. They just ended up, basically dealing with the force that they couldn't handle, pretty much like Russia and Germany. When you look at it, Stalin was basically willing to let 50 million people die to protect Moscow. So there you go.
Right.
Well, that's what Grant was doing. So diversity seems to come into play whenever there are these major conflicts or these big crises that happen. And suddenly you realize, hey, we need more than what we got now. We either need more people or we need a different way of thinking. And that's how stuff happens. That's how every big corporation that's ever gotten anywhere really has worked. Microsoft kind of had the same kind of thing. They could only get to a certain place until they brought in certain types of folks who had other knowledge. Unfortunately, it may not have been black people, but they certainly were Indians and Asians. And, well, I guess India and Asia are the same thing.
They are the same thing. Yeah.
But still, they had to bring in other people to help them to elevate. It works fine on that level, but are they where they need to be? No, because one, there still needs to be more of an inclusion of blacks and Latinos. There needs to be more women in tech. I mean, they're totally missing out on all these other thoughts and beliefs and talents of folks. Now, are they doing it intentionally? I don't think that they're doing it intentionally, but it happens. I'm sure you read the same story I did about this guy, Thaddeus Howes or whatever his name is, who just left Twitter. basically because he was the only black person in a leadership position, and he talked to this guy saying, well, we need to do something more, and the guy said to him, well, we can't risk being worse than we are. Like, wow, that was that was your thought. Wow. And I'm sure the guy say later on, oh, well, I didn't mean it like that. You said it.
Right.
You obviously meant it like that. There's no other way you can take that kind of thing. You know, it's probably like you've probably heard the same thing I've heard. I haven't heard it in a long time, but I used to hear this all the time. You know, I don't think of you as black. Need to, which was always my answer. You need to, because whatever your perception is was wrong if you couldn't think of me as black.
Yeah.
So that's the whole thing. And, you know, I'm in my last month of being on the board of an organization called Arise, which works with disabled people to you know, help them to live life, you know, the same kind of life everyone else does. And there's a lot of people who see someone in a wheelchair or see someone who, you know, who can't see or doesn't hear well, whatever, and they automatically think that they're incapable. Well, you know what? They're as capable as anybody else at a lot of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, it's those perceptions that people have of someone else who's different than them that you have to overcome. There's a guy named John Morrow, for instance, who's in a wheelchair because he was in a back injury, who's one of the top internet marketing guys and content producers out there, doing very, very well, even though he's basically, I think he's quadriplegic, but he's doing well. People can succeed if they're given the opportunity to participate. And like you said, for him, though, he had to basically go off on his own to be able to have a life. So it's too bad that he had to go into, you know, being an entrepreneur, but he has shown that everybody has value. Everyone can succeed. That's, you know, the whole thing. And the more diverse you can make yourself, the stronger you will be long term.
What would you like to promote today as we close, if anything? What have you got to promote?
You know what? Well, thank you first, by the way, for inviting me to talk today. You know, you're going to put the links to my 2 books below. And, you know, I really want to talk about those mainly because that should give you insight into, at least the first one to give you insight into how come leadership might be tough, but it also gives you ideas on how to deal with some of the things that happen. And the second book, the first book is called Embrace the Lead. And then the second book, which is called Leadership Isn't Easy, which basically is a compilation of ideas where I put out, it's more like story form for the most part. I begin with a story of something, and then it's got a moral, and it's got a leadership kind of thing behind it. There's a couple of things I've written where I said, you know what, deconstruct this entire thing into how leadership failed or how leadership worked or how it could have worked and whatever. And its basic intention is to get you thinking about being a better leader. What makes a good leader? What makes a bad leader? What do you want to be? I mean, strangely enough, you might want to be a bad leader. and I hate to say that, but you know, I wrote a recent blog post and I said one of the things that I think is more important than anything else is this consistency thing. If you're always bad, at least your people know what's coming. But if one day you come in and you're the happiest person in the world, and the next day you're coming in and you want to bite everyone's head off, you know, you're scaring people because they're not sure what they're getting every day when they're at work. At least the other way, they can always be prepared. But if you can always be better, it's better for everybody. Being bad isn't necessarily good, but if you're always bad, people are at least prepared. They know what they're getting.
They know what they're getting. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you, Mitch. As you said, we are going to have the links to both of your books, Leadership Is/Isn't and Embrace the Lead, in the show notes below the player that's attached to the show. Once again, thank you, Mitch, for coming on Earbud U. We will also have links to all of your social profiles, all your blogs, everywhere where people can get a hold of you.
And people can get sick of me quick.
Well, you know, hey. So we're gonna put all those links, all of that stuff down in the show notes. And once again, thank you, Mitch, for coming on Earbud U. And we will actually have you back on, and we're going to pick up where we left off with this diversity conversation, because we gotta do a deeper dive into this.
Cool. And also make sure you link to the video interview I did with you. Because you lost your mind on a couple of those things.
I can't lie. Yes, I did. Thanks again, Mitch.
No problem.